This video is actually cursed. The project that I'm going to be introducing to you, I filmed over a year ago, before my 19th birthday, and I just turned 20. And today, I have filmed this intro video 3 times. And so hopefully this time works. Also, in the last time I filmed, there was a hair sticking up somewhere here, and I hope it's gone, but we can't say for sure, so I hope it stays down. But anyway, welcome back to my channel. It's been a while. Like I said, it's been a long time since I actually filmed the video I'm going to be introducing. Since I filmed that project, I have moved twice, had 4 different jobs, and started college. Oh, and also been in a play. So it's been pretty hectic. Haven't had a lot of time to sit down and film this, but I've just decided to make time because I'm honestly done with all this footage taking up space on my laptop. So with all that being said, let's get into it. So I'd like to start with a couple of disclaimers. The first one is that I don't have any formal education or degree in fashion history or history or anything like that, although I am working on it. But I only try my best to share accurate information, and I try not to try to explain something that I'm not totally sure about. But if I do get anything wrong, please let me know, or if you have anything to add, I would be happy to have that information in my back pocket, because I don't like to misinform people if I can help it. The second disclaimer is that when we're talking about any time in fashion history or any particular style or trend, there are always exceptions to the rule. So we can talk about general trends and general silhouettes and things like that, but that doesn't mean that a counterexample didn't exist somewhere at that time, or, you know, something wasn't invented before the time that it became popular. That's usually the way it goes, and just as today, fashion can be as varied as each individual person, because people tailor their clothing to their needs and their wants. So it's a very unique and individualized thing. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's talk about the ideal 1920s figure and how it was achieved. So the 1920s was definitely quite a revolution in women's clothing. The styles of the 1920s differed drastically from the styles of the decades and really the century prior. In the early 1900s, women wore fitted dresses and corsets in the traditional sense of the word, so what you think of when you think of a Victorian corset, that's what I'm talking about. And the ideal figure was an hourglass shape, and more specifically a wasp-waisted shape, which was kind of an S-shaped hourglass, and I'll put a picture up so you can see what I'm talking about. However, in the 1910s, there was this slow transition that started to soften this hourglass figure, and it started to lean more towards a straight figure. By the 1920s, the transition was complete, and the ideal women's figure was basically a boyish rectangle. The way to achieve this was largely through the drop-waisted styles that became popular. Corset-type garments still existed, but their purpose changed from creating an hourglass figure to sort of flattening and straightening everything out as much as possible. These undergarments took on new names like corselet, doublet, and garter brassiere, as well as girdle corset. Not everyone wore these new versions of the corsets though, especially if one had a naturally straight figure already. So that leads us to bras. So the stereotype for the 1920s is that everybody just threw away their corsets and started wearing bras. And that isn't necessarily true. There is some truth to that, but that's not exactly how it went down. Bras came into use in the decades prior to the 1920s because the corset started to sit lower and lower on the bust, and a new form of bust support was required. In this decade, in the 1920s, I mean, bras and corsets continued to work as a team, but the style of dress worn in the 1920s didn't necessarily require a bra and corset if you already possessed that figure, because some women did possess a very straight, boyish, small-busted figure that didn't require a lot of shaping. But just like the corset, the purpose of the bra changed in the 1920s. So in the Edwardian era, the bras had been used to gently shape and sometimes even add volume to the bust, and this was normally called a bust improver, to my awareness. But in the 1920s, bras became super thin, and they were designed to flatten the chest and sort of mush everything down, kind of like a sports bra does for us today. Okay, so that brings me to underwear. So there were quite a few different options for underwear in the 1920s, and I would like to take you back to the 18th century to get a full picture of this. So in the 18th century, generally speaking, women only wore shifts or chemises under their dresses. There was no pant-like undergarment. Everything was just free-flowing down there. But this wasn't a problem because there were multiple petticoats over the chemise, between the outer skirt and the chemise, so everything was well covered. But in the Regency era, when the dresses became thinner and hugged the body more, a little bit more modesty and warmth was required on the lower half of the body. So this is when pantaloons started to come into popularity. And pantaloons stayed popular throughout the 19th century, and eventually towards the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, a garment called combinations was very popular because it was a mix between a chemise and pantaloons, and it was more convenient, and it also added less bulk to the waist, so your waist could look smaller. In the 1920s, we have a continuation of this garment called a teddy or a step-in. And it is in many ways a continuation of the combinations from, the late 19th and a couple decades before this, but it was just smaller and was designed to go under 1920s dresses. The other option for underwear were tap pants and bras. And this is the time when we see a closed crotch seam for the first time, generally speaking. And I'm very thankful for that because I like closed crotch underwear. Even though I love all historical time periods, but I like underwear the way they are today. But that aside, tap pants, bras, and teddies came in a multitude of styles, and slips were also necessary with many of the sheer dresses that were popular at the time. Okay, so daywear, as in the decades before and after, mostly consisted of women's suits, cardigans and skirts, and practical dresses. However, all these options were designed with a drop waist, so a waistline at the hips. And this low waistline reached its lowest at the middle of the decade, around 1926 or 1927, from my research. And the hemlines also changed and could range from the ankle to just below the knee. And again, the hemlines reached their shortest around the same time, the middle of the decade, around 1926 or 1927. Okay, so evening wear was so much fun in the 1920s, and I love looking at evening dresses from the 1920s because they're so creative. There were long dresses, shorter dresses, sheer and opaque, v-neck, scoop neck, backless, all configurations of beading. There were straight and poofy dresses, there was fringe, lace, two-tone paneling, and gores. You name it. It's just so cool to look at these dresses. There's so many different styles. And something I love about looking at 1920s dresses, and I do feel like this does differ a lot from honestly the majority of European fashion for the last few centuries, is that there's this wide variety that wasn't seen for hundreds of years before. There's definitely a variety of dresses in different time periods of fashion, but not to this extent. Before the 1920s, it seems like there was this kind of general formula that all the dresses followed, and there were certain elements of creativity, but not in the way that the 1920s dresses were created, with just all of these different new and innovative ways to piece fabric together. And I just think this is kind of the precursor to modern fashion today in many ways. And again, this is my conviction from my research, not necessarily the only way to look at this. Okay, so let's talk about accessories, makeup, and hair. So accessories and makeup were also very creative and fun, like most of the fashion of the decade, and accessories included hundreds of different variations of little hats, headscarves, and all kinds of different jewelry, including a large string of beads. Usually, that's the stereotype. Day makeup was usually lighter, featuring long and thin eyebrows and blush applied to the apples of the cheeks with doll-like lipstick. Evening makeup was usually a bit more dramatic, with colorful eyeshadow applied all over the upper lid and concentrated in the inner and outer corner of the eyes. The makeup was also applied more liberally in the evening, as it usually is today. Hairstyles had a huge range, so the most common style was a bob worn close to the head, and many times styled with curls decoratively framing the face. However, some girls chose to keep their hair long and cut it shorter in the front to mimic the look of a bob, or they just kept it long and styled it up so it mimicked the popular hairstyles of the time. Okay, now let's talk about my project. So the outfit I decided to create was originally inspired from a kimono shawl thing that was from Forever 21 that a friend gave me as a hand-me-down. It reminded me a lot of 1920s garden dresses I had been seeing on Pinterest recently, so I put it on my dress form to see if I could adapt it into a semi-historically accurate 1920s dress. All I ended up having to do was sew up the front to create a V neckline, which is definitely accurate to the time, and gather up the large shoulder area to create this sort of billowing look. For the slip, I kept looking at pictures on Pinterest and in museum archives, and I decided I wanted to make a black chiffon slip to contrast the white lace. I did some research for a good slip pattern, and I found that the most common was a simple pattern with a straight bodice and gathered hips to accentuate the drop waist of the outer dress. I even found a PDF of instructions on how to make a slip like this, so if I can find that link, I will definitely post it in the description. Okay, lastly, I needed underwear because if you've ever made a historical project, you know how important underwear is in getting the right shape and the right feel of the outfit. So I had to decide between tap pants and a bandeau style bra or a teddy/step-in. In the end, I really ended up liking the bra and tap pants set better, so I looked and looked for a style that I liked, and I finally found an adorable set on an auction website. Luckily, this site had multitudes of high-quality pictures, and I was able to study the construction pretty well. Although the set I was copying was made out of a black chiffon, I decided to make it out of some premium off-white cotton muslin that I had left over from another project. It also perfectly matched the lace I wanted to use on the edges, which definitely was a plus. And aside from the fabric choice, I copied the pattern and its construction as exactly as I possibly could. Alright, for my accessories, I used a tiny bit of leftover silk chiffon for my slip to make a headband and another strip of fabric that I could either tie around my waist or use as a scarf. I also wore a long strand of beads that I had on hand, and sadly that necklace broke a couple weeks after I filmed that final reveal for this, and yeah, it was a pretty hard loss because it's a very Art Deco looking necklace. Alright, so all in all, I had a lot of fun with this project. I'm really excited to finally be able to share it. The reason I like this so much, honestly, is because I have pretty much the perfect figure for dressing 1920s. I'm small and fairly short, but not too thin, and I'm fairly straight-waisted. I also have the ideal face shape, which is an oval face shape and a small chin. And obviously it's very fun to dress for a time period that works well with your natural body, but at least in the 20th and 21st centuries, beauty standards change about every 10 years, and they can differ drastically from one decade to the next. Just a decade later, in the 1930s, a very tall and feminine figure came into fashion, so we'll see how I fare if I ever make a 1930s outfit. If you're curious about the ideal body shapes and beauty standards during different time periods, I'll link a wonderful playlist below for you all to check out. Thank you for watching this video. Stay tuned because I will be posting my construction process of the 1920s outfit that I made. And if you like my videos, please consider subscribing and liking below. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please list them and I will try to respond.